Hey, yesterday was May 4th, which is officially Star Wars Day, because that's the May the 4th play on words, May the 4th be with you. And today being May the 5th for the Star Wars community, which, by the way, Nick Virgilini from our sports department is insanely knowledgeable about Star Wars stuff. He even knows, like, what color lightsaber all the people have in Star Wars and what that means, too. So I was pretty impressed by that by Nick yesterday. But today being May the 5th is Cinco de Mayo, but it's also Revenge of the Fifth, which is a play on the Revenge of the Sith. So as a result of that, your intros today are Star Wars themed. Just drinking a little bit of that for a moment. All right, who wants to go first? Let's start with you, Mr. Carl. He breathes into his microphone like the Overlord. And sometimes... That's Ferretti. That goes back to when Joe and Mike shared a telephone during COVID. Oh, here we go. He breathes into his microphone like the Overlord, and sometimes I can't tell if he's interested or bored. He lacks for nothing, including his intensity, and his tax law knowledge challenges my density. For the longest time, I thought of Mike Carl as a rhino hater. But during Star Wars Week, he reigns here as our resident Darth Vader.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Good to be there.
He's one of the fellows who I regard as a guy in the know. He's loyal to his pals, just like that C-3PO. He's got a law degree, but he's still just a regular West Virginian. Though I think it's fair to say, without that required conservative opinion, our audience knows him best as our resident liberal talker. Let's welcome in our hairiest panelist, Larry Schultz, our version of Chewbacca.
I knew Chewbacca was coming up. That look you gave across the table, he was like looking at me like.
I gotta credit Alonzo for my assistance, a little assistance on right now. Our next panelist is still writing his story and climbing the ladder, and when he's on this show, our Facebook community commenters just get madder. His Star Wars character has a thirst for the thrill. He waits for that moment to move in for the kill. If Alonzo Perry was an insect, he'd probably be a praying mantis. But as a Star Wars character, he's Count Dooku Darth Tyrannus. Good morning, Alonzo.
I'm gonna lean into it. I love that.
You got it, baby. Our next panelist missed last week to go and play 18 holes. But he's back this week commenting on Justice and Mooney and Manchin political polls. The driver of his cart last week was none other than Big Ben. Is the driver that applies to him this week Adam, as in Kylo Ren? No. Joe Ferretti's too good a dude to be an evil talker. There's no other choice than to make him our Luke Skywalker. Joe, good morning.
Good morning.
He's on a roll today.
On a roll?
Yeah.
These intros continue until 9:55, by the way. So make sure you're brief in your points.
Our chat audience is clapping. They're happy.
Our next Star Wars character has a lot in common with our last panelist slot. They both give advice, whether you want it or not. They speak the language in a way that you may not understand, but fortunately, I'm here to translate and help lend a hand. And now, as I round out the last of my Star Wars intro coda, I'm pleased to announce Bill Stubblefield, a.k.a. Yoda.
Yoda. I was hoping for Luke Skywalker, Luke, or somebody like that, but not Yoda.
No, you got the Yoda there. So, again, I'd like to thank all of you for participating in the intros this week. We'll see you next week. Thanks for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go with our leadoff hitter, Joey Toots Ferretti, and issue number one.
Okay, issue number one, fellas, I was struck by the fact that Donald Trump, our former president, is going to be doing a town hall on CNN next week, and I believe the broadcast is Tuesday. And it struck me on a number of levels that this is actually happening. And so I thought about, and my question I posed to the panel this morning is, what questions, because we should all have one, do we feel it is necessary for Donald Trump to be asked and to answer? And I'm trying to think of questions that we would not accept the typical political response and where the politician talks around the subject, but something we would really press him on that is of concern for the body politic. We know that some out there certainly think he's still a viable candidate and that the alternative to Donald Trump sitting in the White House is unthinkable. And others out there who just cannot comprehend that he might be the Republican nominee and stand for election in 2024 and would probably rather shave with a chainsaw than think about Donald Trump back in the White House. So I think from all sides and all perspectives, we probably want to at least hear from this fella. So what question would you ask him? And what do you think is necessary for him to answer directly so that he either can appeal to people and get them to vote for him, or he could be exposed and have people run away from the thought of him being the next president of the United States? So what are your questions?
All right, let's start first with Alonzo.
I would, I would just ask him. I mean, wow, that's a really good question, Joe. Mainly because, I wouldn't sit in the CNN audience, but I think that something good to talk about is, something about energy. I would ask him, what are you going to do about this energy problem? What are you going to do, to reverse some of the course that we're taking? And hopefully, that's a discussion that can happen on that side of the aisle, to maybe bring people together and say, okay, let's do all forms of energy, or let's figure out a way for us to be compatible. But I would love to see him actually bring that into the discussion. I hope that it's not just a political hit job, to try to sit there and antagonize him or get him riled up to say something that's not satiable or something. I don't want him to sensationalize it. Just get to the issues. I would love to hear him talk about the issues.
Mike Carl.
I would ask him, what, if anything, would you change about the way either the policies or the procedures that you followed as when you served as president before? And that how he would react to that would be interesting to me.
Billy?
Yeah, interesting you ask the question now, Joe. In Wall Street Journal yesterday, Peggy Noonan had an article about this very subject, President Trump being on CNN, but she countered that by saying that in all probability, from all indications, President Trump will not appear on a debate with fellow Republicans running for office, feeling that the CNN forum was more conducive to him than what the debate forum would be. If I ask a question, I would go with the international relationship. There was a sense that a lot of what President Trump did was out of the hip pocket, spur of the moment. And whether that was in fact the case or whether just the way it appeared. Now, he had some successes, he had some failures with this kind of spontaneous sort of international relationship, but it was different than what we've ever had in the past. In the past, we've had a lot of preparation by the staff before we had a policy set forth, but we did not see that as much with President Trump.
Mr. Schultz.
I would ask, given the rampant West Virginia correction officer shortages, aren't you glad you'll be going to jail in either New York or federal court?
There's a writer's strike, Larry. That means you came up with that on your own. Was that your legitimate question?
He's like, I'm done.
Yeah, I really don't see the point of his campaign, and I wouldn't spend very much time thinking about what I might ask him in order to project a surprise on his part that might get me the truth. I think we're well past that in his career. I think he would treat it as he treats questions all the time, with contempt and without any particular knowledge of the subject matter. So I couldn't take it seriously. For that reason, I wouldn't be in the CNN audience.
Back to you, Joe.
Well, let me follow up then. Is it not interesting that he has agreed to a town hall on the very network that he probably despises the most, but maybe after MSNBC, but that Fox would not get his audience and his participation in such a town hall event? Is this an indication that there's some sort of fissure or divide that has developed now, given how Rupert Murdoch has responded to the lawsuit from Dominion and has paid the many millions and fired Tucker Carlson, who was one of President Trump's biggest cheerleaders? Is there a situation here where Donald Trump will be somewhat diminished in his ability to run for office because he doesn't have a network that's in his pocket? I think that the overall scheduling of this is interesting in and of itself. I don't know what kind of questioning he's going to get. Caitlin Collins, I believe, who's kind of a newbie over at CNN, is going to be doing the moderating, and who knows who's in the audience at that point. But I just found it interesting that he's now agreed to what is prime time viewership on CNN versus another network. Is there any question or thought to how this may affect the race overall if he doesn't have the backing of a network, completely behind his campaign?
Yeah, Joe, you may be right. I had just the opposite thought. Instead of being a deliberate play to CNN, it was his way of poking his finger in the eye of the bear. In that case, be Fox News. But Trump has been consistent in the past of poking and taking jabs at friends and foes through the years. So it may have been more a deliberate approach to try to get favoritism with CNN, but I think it's just the opposite. I think it's just a convenient way to poke CNN in the eye.
I disagree, only because I think that, when you're the president of the entire country. You're not just the president of the Republicans in the country. And so, I see this kind of as extending an olive branch. Do I think that, it's not going to be a hostile territory? No. I think it's absolutely going to be hostile. I think, the questions that he's going to get are going to be loaded. I think, there's going to be a lot of preparation that goes into this to walk out, unscathed. But at the end of the day, you have to try to reach across and extend that olive branch. And, I applaud him for trying, at least, in this fashion. I don't think that it's a way to get back at the network, or I think it's the first time they're actually going to get some viewership.
Alonzo, you said what I think everybody would like to believe. The president is president of the whole country. But I'm not sure that Donald Trump felt that way. Donald Trump made it very obvious up front. He was president of the Republicans. If the Democrats existed, so be it. It was just their hindrance along the way. So I don't think we had the sense, at least many of us did not have the sense that he was president of the whole country. He was showing favoritism from day one.
I think, it was the periphery was attacking the core, and that's in our government body. We saw issues with his DOJ, issues with, the FBI. We saw issues, with him not being able to get along with a lot of the administrative agencies and functions that governments normally work under. I think that his election was so unprecedented, so shocking that, immediately once he got in there, they didn't let him adjust. They didn't allow him to, learn the different mechanisms and move in. On day one, he was, Sean Spicer was up there, sweating and getting just drilled with questions about the actual election turnout, or what was it, his inaugural address. Yeah. From then, it was game on. And so I never think he got a chance to catch his feet.
But didn't he bring that on himself by saying the greatest turnout in the history of a presidential election, and yet the satellite photographs, all the photographs showed that it was a large number, but certainly not the best ever. But he brought it on himself by saying that. He basically dangled that plum out.
Trump's a hype man.
Yeah.
He's P.T. Barnum. He's always, everything has always been the biggest, the best, the greatest. He's a promotions guy. He's a salesman. That's what he does. And that's the attitude he took into the presidency. And to back what Alonzo said for a moment, Bill, and to challenge your point about he was only the president of the Republicans, it was pretty clear from the moment he made his announcement he was running that a half plus 1% of the country wanted no parts of him and was not going to honor or respect his presidency regardless of his behavior. Now, he didn't do a lot to earn a lot of respect from that side of the aisle, no question. He never did extend an olive branch. There was never any, sorry, I kind of screwed that up on my fault kind of thing. But there was never any possibility of acceptance from that side of the aisle, not just in the House, but in society as well. Mike Carl.
Well, I certainly agree that my impression of Trump is that he's just, pushing back and sending a signal to, Fox. Mm-hmm. But I also agree that his advisors would tell him what Alonzo, that's the reason they would have him do this. But don't forget, he got elected because millions of people who would normally, if they voted, would vote Democrat, voted for him. Mm-hmm. Don't forget that. And whether he thinks this is a way to, show that he's the same guy that's, anti-establishment, anti-old political, particularly left-wing establishment, I don't know. But it'd be a reason to do it. But given his instincts, I think number one is he wants to push back on Fox.
I think you're probably right there, and I think Alonzo's got a little bit on that too. I don't think it's him extending an olive branch because I don't think he softens that way, but I think it also creates great theater and tremendous publicity for him. It's going to drive ratings because people are going to want to see that kind of stuff thrown at him and what he does back, because he's not going to wilt from it. It's going to be a great show in how he responds to it. That's going to be what he does. Larry Schultz.
I think that it's going to be like most appearances by Trump by himself, a wee bit of a clown show. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't seem to break his heart. I mean, I think that's kind of what he likes to do.
Loves controversy.
It will be interesting to see whether is CNN going to filter questions like mine out.
Well, that is not a legitimate journalistic question.
They don't call it Communist News Network for nothing.
Are they going to take those? Are they going to take those questions out? Or are they going to let people actually ask what they want to know? Because to ask Donald Trump a question about Ukraine, mm-hmm. It just seems like a fool's errand to me. He will use it to start talking about Hunter Biden talking to Zelensky before the war started or something. He's not interested in those issues.
Nope.
At all. And so for CNN to do this, let's see what happens. We need to bridge the divide in this country, and that ain't going to do it.
Joe, you weren't here last week, but my summation on some of this stuff last week was America loves wrestling. Wrestling gets high ratings. We know it's not real, but we love it. And it's been partially legitimized because it's now merged with MMA. We love wrestling, and this is going to be more wrestling. This is Monday Night Raw is what this is. Trump versus CNN's audience, Monday Night Raw. Don't miss it. This is what this is going to be.
Let me give a shout out to Joe very quickly. I think Joe could ask the question, is the grass green? And there would be a lively discussion generated from that.
It's true.
Could be. Joe, back to you.
I'll tell you, Rob, thinking about what this is going to be like, he really is going to control this whole forum, because any questions regarding the New York indictment, January 6th, E. Jean Carroll, the Georgia investigation, Mar-a-Lago, his answer can be stock. It can simply be, I'm sorry, I can't comment, that's under investigation, or that's a pending case. And then it's going to move on to something else. So the issues that a lot of folks in the country are still a little concerned about, such as illegalities, he's probably going to dodge them with that kind of answer. So you're going to get a lot of what Larry's talking about, a lot of deflection and talking about what he wants to talk about.
I don't know. I think if he gets asked about these women, I think he's going to go, they're ugly. They could never get a man like me. There's no way I would have touched them. She's a skank. He's going to do that. He's going to call names and demean. Yeah, that's what he's going to do. He's not going to say a stock answer.
And I was going to say, he may deflect, but he's not going to give a stock answer.
Yeah.
He never has.
He's not in a disposition. Like, in his disposition, I know it hurt him that he couldn't make any other comments. I mean, he did. He brought out his own speech or whatever. He was like, this is a political prosecution. This is not fair. Like, he did
There's three presidents in history, maybe four, that when you do them, you have to do their voice. Nixon, Clinton, Reagan, and Trump. When you quote them, you got to do an impression when you do it. Joe, explain this Big Ben Joe Ferretti photograph before we go to break. Colin, you still have it handy?
Oh, I was... it was a member guest tournament down where I live, and Ben's a resident of the area, and I just was lucky enough to be in his flight, so I got to play him and his partner with my partner, Craig Manford, local attorney, who come down to visit me, and we had a great time, and it was fun because I knew Ben's history, of course, going back to the moment he first took the field after Tommy Maddox got hurt in a ball game. You remember that, Rob?
I do.
And,
Ravens.
So knowing somebody's professional career as well as I did, it was we had a lot of fun.
Cool. Oh, well, very nice.
And he couldn't have been he couldn't have been nicer, by the way.
Did you see
Great guy.
the label that Colin has up there on the screen?
No, I'm not. I don't have a screen in front of me.
Okay, it says The Godfather and the Godsend. Because that was the banner at Heinz Field. Big Ben Godsend was there for his entire career.
Yeah.
I don't know who it was that hung it, but that's what it was. All right, thanks, Joe. We're back with more. We take our 9 o'clock break here. We move on to issue number 2, and for that, we go to the Admiral, Bill Yoda Stubblefield.
Rob, we've started the 2024 election cycle. During the past few weeks, you've had several folks running for office for the governor, for the 2nd Congressional District, Attorney General, and the like. I have been struck by the fact that every one of them, with exception of one, has invoked cultural issues as opposed to infrastructure issues. The only exception would be J.B. Mikulski, who, when asked, he said he thought his primary issue was education of the younger children. Everyone else has invoked cultural, never mentioned anything at all about infrastructure. This is kind of characterized with Mike Stewart, who's running for Attorney General. His campaign announcement was, "We live in an era of fake news, counsel truth, ESG, woke corporate boards, cultural warriors, climate crazes, gender confusion, election uncertainty, drug normalizers, indoctrinators, history haters." Not a word about how you can improve or the needs of West Virginia. My question to the panel is this a reflection of what we're going to see in the 2024 election, that it's all going to be cultural issues, cultural warfare, if you will, or substantive infrastructure issues?
And I'd like to just throw a tag onto that,
sure. Bill,
and with your answer, explain why you think it is or isn't that way. Let's begin with Larry Schultz here.
I think it's that way. I'll begin by saying this. I think it's that way because the Republican Party does not have a platform anymore. They don't have a list of issues dealing with the structure of our government that they're excited about bringing forward for the people to review. Their platform is basically that list that Bill just read off. At least that's what you hear from the vast majority of their candidates. I would think if there were a platform, they'd say, well, first we have to build better bridges, and second we have to put changes in this or that federal program. But if you don't have a platform, I don't know how you coordinate that. The average guy running for office for Congress, let's say, man or woman running for office, wouldn't know what the right position is to take on that to speak to the members of the party, because they don't really have a platform. They didn't in 2020. They didn't. The presidential race didn't have a platform. So I don't know why they would suddenly start talking about substantive issues. It does not appear that they've taken any time to think about what the substance ought to be. So because of that, you're not going to get that. You're going to get culture issues all day long. And I mean, it's really odd in West Virginia because, we don't have any big cities here. We don't have the kinds of issues that are in states like California and Texas and Florida and New York. But we're going to talk about them anyway.
Why do you think that is, though, Larry?
Because you can scare people more easily and you don't have to spend any time thinking about it. If you talk about issues that you firmly oppose, like gender issues, and you're against it right down the beginning, then you don't have to have a solution to anything. You're not even talking about a problem in West Virginia. But if that's your attitude, then you don't have to spend any time thinking, hey, how are we going to get a majority together to do something about this? Instead, it becomes like a rally more than a substantive political campaign in which you simply say, here's what I'm for, and wait for the crowd to cheer. And, you say, I'm against all this gender fluidity stuff. And then everybody cheers. Even though on the list of problems that face our state, for example, that's pretty low. That's pretty far down. We got, all kinds of other problems that do need a structural plan to fix. And I'm not hearing one.
Alonzo Perry.
Well, I fundamentally disagree. I mean, you have to.
We would have been disappointed with any other response from you.
Yeah, that would be weird if I was like, yeah, I agree with that, and then just left it at that. No, but first we have to address problems before we even decide to fix them. We have to say that there is a problem. We have a cultural problem. So of course, culture issues are going to be a part of the equation. But I want to push back because we have some of the most creative, individuals that are running for office in this entire, I would say we have innovators across the country, all in this state. Whether it's people that are picking up the fight against ESG, whether it's people that are developing these school choice programs, whether it's people that are, making government finance more transparent, whether it's, leaving certain election systems. I mean, these guys have a record and have done things that are, great for the country, but, as a leader. But you have to know that there's an issue at first with, our culture. And until you address where you're at, then you're not even going to be able to, come up with a solution of how to fix those problems. Infrastructure, DHHR, all of those issues are super important. And we have lawmakers and legislators working on it. We have gubernatorial candidates that are fully equipped to, I think, implement what is needed. But when you have someone like Mike Stewart that's running for Attorney General, he's got to let us know, in the primary, first of all, that, you see that these issues are relevant and that they're a part of the equation in what we should do moving forward. When you're the Attorney General, you are our defense for the state against the federal government and its overreaches. If you are just kowtowing or go along with what we see as a progressive orthodoxy, then it's not, you're not our guy. We need someone that's going to say, these are our values, this is what we care about, whether it be in the cultural aspect, economic, and then, from there we can move forward.
Mr. Ferretti.
Well, if I had a voice in the state GOP, and of course I don't, so I'm going to appeal to people like Alonzo and Mike Carl, I would try to convince them to declare victory and move on in the cultural war in the state of West Virginia. Bill's question was focused on, I think, pretty much state politics. And there really isn't a war going on in West Virginia over culture. There's not CRT is not being taught in schools. Children aren't getting gender-affirming surgeries in West Virginia. They never have. Abortion is now illegal in almost all instances in the state. So declare victory and move on and really tackle the problems that are threatening West Virginia going forward. And that is the fact that we have 200 permanent substitute teachers in Berkeley County schools, which I heard in the previous segment. We have no jailers to run the jails. We have no internet in many parts of the state where children could enhance their educational opportunities if they could only connect to the web. We're surely in need of infrastructure improvements in the state. Tackle those problems and declare victory in the cultural war and just move on with it. I think the state would be better for it. So I appeal to people like Alonzo and Mike Carl to call it a day on cultural wars and do what the state needs.
And that will leave it to you, Mr. Carl.
Well, I have to say I appreciate the recommendation, and I totally agree with what Joe just said. The culture wars were started by the liberals, and what we're seeing now is the reaction. But we need there's far more important things in West Virginia, as Joe points out, than that. And infrastructure is we keep talking about it, and that's a big deal, no question about it. But governmental structure is a even bigger deal, and of course I'm talking about tax policy and so forth. But that's what we need to focus on, and so I agree. Call victory in West Virginia on the culture question and move on to the things that really matter in West Virginia. Why we're still at the bottom despite all the bragging we hear from Justice.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Mike, because, and Bill, your question you pose is an interesting one as well, because we've interviewed several candidates, and with the exception of J.B. McCuskey, none of them have really come with substance first. It's been culture first. And with the candidates we've interviewed, I get the impression that each classroom is stocked with a drag queen reading during story time in the local school systems. Now, if anybody knows of drag queens reading story time in West Virginia schools, please let me know. And I'm not being a smartass here. I'm genuinely throwing this out here. If we know of any drag queens reading at story time in Berkeley County schools, please let me know. I'm not aware of it. But when the candidates come through, this seems to be the priority issue in West Virginia politics right now. So I'm assuming it's going on rampantly throughout the school systems in West Virginia. I'm not aware of it.
Well, I actually had a one-on-one conversation with Patrick Morrissey yesterday, and talked about these campaign focus, and I emphasized to him the importance of the substantive policy, and to stay, that culture war is, just. And of course I told him that I was going to support him because I thought he'd done a lot as Attorney General to improve. We're not fighting the culture wars, but to improve the relationship of the federal government with all the states, and including West Virginia.
And just came up with a $68 million settlement program,
right? And of course the West Virginia v. EPA is way beyond just fighting the climate change psychos. It's a principle that federal bureaucrats cannot make substantive law that controls our lives, and that is huge. And there's some other cases of that same principle that he's pursuing.
I got a text from a drag queen who said we'd come into West Virginia more, except when we drive down 81, those potholes knock our wigs off. It kills the whole outfit. So that appears to be the explanation for the absence of them in the local schools anyway.
So, now that the Proud Boys are going to prison, that's going to ease up the drag queen thing, right? Aren't they basically drag queens?
I don't even know where you're going with that.
They're cosplay. I mean, they dress up like they're in the paramilitary. And they're not going to be able to take those armored vests to prison.
I don't think that makes them a drag queen.
We're not being very honest, though, if we say that there's no cultural issues being fought in Berkeley County. I know because I'm at the forefront of them.
Examples.
So in Berkeley County, I went and fought against a curriculum that's being introduced in 2024 called Africana Studies, right, where they're teaching pseudo-archaeology to a teacher that's going to then teach to the kids. And in the book, it says that Mesoamericans are incapable of creating calendar technology, of building pyramids without the input of Western Africans. So they came before Columbus, and that's the synopsis.
Well, that's wrong.
So it is wrong. And so I had the entire
historically, it's wrong.
Which is what? If we're teaching fake history, if we're teaching, a class that is being advertised to black children, Africana studies, then, maybe we should teach them an honest, history. But that's not the case. It was approved 100%. And to say that there's no culture issues, WVU Medicine was never doing gender affirming care. They lobbied to have the practice continue. They're doing double mastectomies to kids. They're prescribing these medications to kids. So it is happening. And what's funny is that it's happening under our noses, and there's a news desert at the local level that's not allowing us to hear what's really going on. And that's why I urge people, get involved. Get into some of these committees. Get into different things in your community, because then you would start to see it. We can't sit here and dismiss it and say, "Oh, it's not happening whatsoever," when I am literally seeing it play out, at very localized levels,
And you've been challenged on this with some of the Board of Education folks.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Well, they just don't want me to say anything.
They're doing it real time. Yeah. The point is, you would think, as critical as we are, and I'll yield to, even though I don't necessarily agree with you, I'll yield to you may be right. There are cultural issues that need to address. But does that mean at the exclusion of all the other substantive issues? And that's what we're seeing, Alonzo, at the exclusion of all the other substantive issues. These folks that are running, most of them have been very successful in the prior jobs. Mac Warner, for example, was on last week. Mac has done a great job as Secretary of State. When asked by Rob, he immediately defaulted into two issues: the election criteria and the cultural issues. That was his argument, and not using all his successes as Secretary of State. And I find this both disheartening and also frightening and confusing.
It's very early in the race, and I do hope, especially if they're listening to this program, that they come to bring more issues to the forefront that affect our everyday lives. I will seed ground there and say, I want you to talk about the issues. What are you going to do to make my state better? That would draw me to vote for them. But I will dismiss the notion entirely that culture issues are not seeping into all of our institutions, and we're putting people that have a mindset, a mind frame that is not consistent with, I think, what a majority of people believe.
Issue number 3, Lawrence Schultz.
Yes, is the reason that Chief Justice Roberts is not moving on Clarence Thomas's revealed difficulties related to the appearance of impropriety implicit in Roberts' wife's conflict-laden work as a law firm recruiter. Justice Roberts, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, his spouse is a law firm recruiter. And a lot of those law firms that she recruits high-quality lawyers to go to have cases pending before the court or get cases pending before the court. She makes a tremendous amount of money doing this work. I think the number that I've heard quoted over the years is something on the order of $10 million. Recently, the Democrats in the Senate asked Chief Justice Roberts to come and talk about the ethical improprieties in Clarence Thomas's recent past, and he declined. Do we need some other branch of government to lean in and start looking at this? The law regarding Justice Thomas is that if you get a gift from somebody, whether they've got business before the court or not, you must disclose it. And it's clear that there are millions and millions of dollars worth of gifts that have been given to the Thomases by Mr. Crow, Harlan Crow, that have never been disclosed. And that every week we seem to hear another part of Justice Thomas's life where Mr. Crow has had a big financial influence. Last week it was Harlan Crow owns the home where Clarence Thomas's mother lives rent-free. This week it is a grandnephew of Clarence Thomas, who he's the legal guardian for, got his private school education paid for by Mr. Crow. None of this was reported as required. If a magistrate in Berkeley County did this, what Justice Thomas has done, they would be probably not only taken off the bench, they might find themselves in jail. We did this with our own state Supreme Court not very many years ago for these improprieties that make it look like you might be taking money on the side and favor one side over the other. It's not a question of whether you would or not. It's a question of whether you're setting up people to be able to say you did help one side over the other because of this money. That eats away at the foundations of our jurisprudence and of our rule of law in this country. So here we are with another branch of government besides the executive branch where there appears to be some sort of a problem, and we can't get anybody to speak honestly about it who has knowledge of it. I want to know what the panel thinks we should do about Justice Thomas and Justice Roberts.
Let's begin with his law school classmate, Michael Carl.
Well, we should do what that the court has always done, that the members of Congress have always done, and that is follow their own rules. And he has followed the rules. If you're saying disclosure is required, then there are by rules. The point is the founders of our country set up 3 independent branches of government, and the Congress, their leverage or their oversight is limited to the Supreme Court, is limited to impeachment. And they could impeach Roberts and Thomas, if they think they can get the votes. But the representatives of the voters are the ones that have to do that, and so there is a restraint. It's called impeachment, and that's the way the country's set up, and that's why the United States is the greatest country in the world, and why it has succeeded for 200 years.
Mr. Stubblefield.
Yeah. First, I do not think. Who knows what happens to the Supreme Court? It's very secretive. They want to keep it that way. They say they have the enforcement laws, or laws they're going to try to enforce. Unquestionably, the Supreme Court has the most lax laws regarding ethics of any of other legislative branch. As far as your point, Mike, and I've heard this mentioned often, that the Congress has very little influence over the Supreme Court. However, one of the most distinguished conservative lawyers in the country, Michael Ludick, who was chair of the 4th District, has said unquestionably, Congress has indisputable power to enact laws imposing ethical standards on the Supreme Court. Now, he says Congress has this, but the fact that will they do this? Absolutely not. As long as we have names and party identification attached to the Supreme Court, we're not going to take any action. Congress is split. If we had the Supreme Court A, B, C, D, G, and F, then you might have something done. But as long as there's a Clarence Thomas name associated with it or Robert's name associated with it, Congress is not going to get involved.
Alonzo.
So, first I want to have a question. I know some of the people in the audience may not know what the judicial branch does, but the justices are there to interpret the Constitution. So I have a question, Larry. Does this hurt Justice Thomas's ability to interpret the Constitution?
If he has taken money from somebody who's on one side of the case, yes, it does.
Okay,
and
he hasn't done that.
Would you say that
we're not sure about
Cook
that?
has no cases in the court.
Hold on. Let me finish. Let me finish my line of questioning.
Hey, you're messing with his law school classmate. You need to be careful here.
So, would you say then that when Justice Ruth Gator Ginsburg, right, officiated a gay wedding before the gay marriage case went to the Supreme Court, she should have recused herself, and she probably violated some type of ethics in that scenario?
I don't know enough about the precise ethical rules that apply to such a thing. What I do know is that you can't have Supreme Court justices taking money.
What a dodge. What a dodge. So Justice
Did she
Breyer,
get $1 million for doing that?
Justice Breyer was one of the most frequent vacation type of people on the court. I mean, this guy has taken trips all over the place all the time. Who knows?
Get the documents and tell me.
This is a political stunt. And I'm running out of words to call this phony. You know, I'm going to get to like malarkey here soon. But it's just, that's what it is. If it wasn't Clarence Thomas, right? If it wasn't him, and this was a liberal justice, you would never hear about this type of exposure. This is a guy they are targeting. He's sitting on the farther right of the bench, and they want to, get him. This is not anything with any...
Let me just say, Alonzo, Mike Carl could not look any more proud of you than he does right now.
If this were a Morgan County magistrate, he'd be headed for jail.
Oh, my gosh.
Joe Ferretti.
Well, Alonzo's question is only half of the equation. I don't know about Justice Thomas's ability to interpret the Constitution, except for what I read in his opinions. But the courts can only function if the people believe they are above the appearance of impropriety. That has been a hallmark of our judicial system ever since its founding, because they make rulings in a lot of contentious areas in our society. And in order for the public to accept their decisions in some of those contentious areas, the public has to feel that the court is beyond reproach. And in a case where money, and it's reported this morning that Ginny Thomas received $25,000 from Leonard Leo, he of the Federalist Society, and he who's been orchestrating the appointment of conservative justices to the Supreme Court. I mean, at what point do we call into question whether there's an appearance of impropriety here? I often tell the story about trying a case in Jefferson County, and we got turned out for lunch, and the judge on my case, Judge Thomas Steptoe, a man beyond reproach, saw me walking down the same side of the street, and he jaywalked to get away from me because he didn't even want any interaction between judge and lawyer during the pending case.
Joe, you fail to bring out in context, though, that everyone does that when they see you coming down the street.
that may be true. But,
Except Ben Roethlisberger.
Except Ben, yeah.
The point is that some of these judges take this matter seriously, and thank God they do, because they have to have that appearance of being beyond any question of ethics. What's Justice Roberts going to do in this case? What he's done in the past? Nothing. He's going to ride it out. He's going to hope that the election season takes over, and he's going to hope this issue dies. He's already indicated by his refusal to come before the Judiciary Committee and just issuing a written response to their concerns that that's all he's going to do. And it's not going to solve the issue, which is the other half of the question that Alonzo posed was, can they rule, and are they knowledgeable enough to interpret the law? And number two, do they act above any questions of impropriety? I think there's a real question about that second part of that equation.
I would also note that their approval ratings, their popularity ratings among the public are at historic lows in our lifetimes.
The justices shouldn't be popular. Their job is not to make laws. Their job is not to instruct.
Their job is to be fair, and people don't think they are.
Their job is to interpret the Constitution, and that's what they do. And I have a tremendous respect for them because they do it in plain meaning, which is, the most reasonable standard that you can apply when reading something. You say, this phrase, this line means something. And guess what? If people don't like the way that the Supreme Court has decided on something, then they use their legislative power to make a law or to override a constitutional fixture. This is, we're talking about the foundation in federalism, like how our system works.
Even before that is what Joe's talking about. The public has to be able to trust that these people are beyond reproach ethically. And if they don't, and I'm telling you, these recent events are starting to make that tick away. If they don't, then it's not going to matter what their opinions say. People are not going to accept them.
Oh, as a lawyer, you're not going to abide by the rulings of the Supreme Court?
I'm going to abide by them.
You think they're influenced?
I'm going to abide by them, but you might have noticed, Mike, that the vast majority of Americans are not lawyers bound to follow everything the Supreme Court says.
Every citizen is bound to follow the law.
No.
The lawyers
they're
are
not.
supposed to explain what the law is, but every citizen is subject to the law. Tell me I'm wrong.
The average citizen has a duty under the Constitution to obey the laws. But if the laws, as a practical
Was
matter,
that a question mark at the end of that?
No, they have a duty to obey the laws. But if the laws are being decided and handed down to us by corrupt justices, you will see people withdraw from that. Try it. I mean, they're trying it now, and they're going to find out that soon their rating will be on the level of, I don't know.
Talk show host.
Yeah. Well,
Thank you, Bill.
It's Larry Thomas Jefferson Schultz.
And our system has a
tree of
remedy for
liberty.
that. If it's that bad, if it's as bad as you describe it, then the people's representatives in the Congress will impeach them. There is a arrangement
except
to
you
deal
got to
with
have
that.
2/3,
There's
and
no
if
way
it's a
it's going-
50,
But that-
50
that's-
Senate, you're not going to get
in our
2/3.
polarized world,
That's the
Mike,
law.
that's not going to happen.
Right.
That's not going to happen.
It can't
No,
happen.
it's
It
not
would-
going to happen
it would-
because the circumstance he described is
It-
far less serious than he described it.
We're being politically driven on, and the Congress is not going to do anything if it requires more than 5 to 10 votes more than what that party has.
If-
Congress is incapable of doing anything, Mike, because they're polarized. frozen.
That's the system.
If
If the public doesn't demand it hard enough, it doesn't happen.
it's not an impeachable offense, and if that's impeachable, if that is, I mean, we are really lowering.
We're talking about something
to
much
a
more
dangerous.
We're talking about something more basic than that. And let's keep personalities, let's keep individuals' names out of it. The Supreme Court, by everyone's standards, has a more lax requirement of reporting, a more lenient way of doing business than any other part of our government. Shouldn't we try to put them on the same level as far as reporting? Because the optics makes all the difference in the world. Right now, the optics is poor for the Supreme Court, primarily because they have a lot of latitude on how they're doing business. Let's take personalities out of it.
I don't believe in impeaching people because it looks
I'm not
bad.
saying impeaching. I'm saying reporting. There's a lot you can do besides up to impeaching. I've not mentioned impeaching one time. Only one that's mentioned impeaching is Mike Carl.
Well, even if we're not talking about impeachment, what type of remedy do you see that would be fit for this? I mean, I just gave you an example of someone that had literally officiated a gay wedding before a gay wedding case, and she didn't recuse herself. Would that not be an impeachable offense? Would that not be something that should provide some corrective action?
This is a problem that we have on everything, Alonzo. If you go far enough back in the history, you can always find an example to support your case. Let's not look, what did X do, or did Y do, or even this case, what did Clarence Thomas do?
But that's a precedent.
No, sir. I'm looking, saying the precedent has not been that the Supreme Court has lax enforcement or lax requirements. Tighten that up. That's all I'm asking.
And on that note, let's play the Larry theme song on this show. It's a lonely world when you're Larry on this show. But he doesn't buckle from it, ladies and gentlemen. Alonzo, you are on the clock. You're up next. We move on to issue number 4 in our next segment. And now issue number 4, One Man, Alonzo Perry.
So I want to kind of get into international politics a little bit, and I want to ask the panel, due to the inability for the Mexican government to decouple from the cartel, should we have some type of military intervention, or should it just at least be an option?
All right. Where you go, Mr. Carl?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by military intervention. Actually, our military goes into Mexico, or actively addresses outside of our border this deal that Mexico won't reject the tyranny. I don't think so, but I do think that there's an important difference. I mean, I'm just not for excess or what extending the military under those circumstances, but I do think that we need to use our military to protect our country at the border, and we need to make a distinction between protecting the border and reforming the substantive immigration laws. And the other side, from you and me, can always confuse the issue and say, well, they can't straighten out the immigration laws and qualifications and the process. So you can protect the border separately, then fix the substance of the immigration policy. But I don't. I wouldn't favor actual, external military intervention.
Mr. Stubblefield.
Alonzo, once again, you found a way to frighten me and keep me awake at night.
I was surprised Mike didn't give him a neocon lecture right there.
That's right, exactly. And I just unplugged myself, so I'll come back to it in a minute. No, I don't think we should. I think that would set all sorts of precedent. We could, if Canada said something we didn't like, we'd send troops up to Canada, or we'd send them to Great Britain. It would just set a precedent that would be horrible in its conception. I do agree with the point that Mike made, that we have to do something on immigration law. This is not new today. We've been talking about it for the last 20, 25 years. Congress has not done anything about it. Even when they've had the majority on one side or the other, they basically have not approached. They've done some tweaking of the edges, but they've not gone in and done anything substantive.
And that is my very point. That
Yes.
is distinguished and separate issue from protecting the border from invasion by illegal immigrants.
Well, the question Alonzo posed was going beyond that.
No.
Actually,
I made that
yeah,
distinction.
yeah.
But you actually
I did
fell
not.
into the point that I was making, that the Democrats have confused the issue about border security with immigration reform.
When I said 20, 25 years or so ago, Mike, that was deliberate. But during that time, we've had both the Republicans and the Democrats that had the White House and the majority of Congress. And neither party has addressed this immigration
I
problem.
absolutely agree with you with that, but that is distinct, and we can still protect our country on the border.
Mr. Schultz.
That sounds like a platform point. But I don't see that in the Republican platform because there isn't one. Plus, it's easy. It's a nice transition one. You can take it and make it kind of a culture issue, too, because you can mix up immigration and drug protection, protecting our country from the you can mix those two things up
But can
by
you
just talking about the border.
Can you work drag queens into the border, though?
Well, the Proud Boys are going to jail. I don't know. They were the training ground, I always thought. But look, I would be interested to see a National Republican Party platform plank that talks about the very thing that Mike talks about. I'm not saying it's a terrible idea. I'm saying that it doesn't exist. They don't have such a position. And I don't know. That's why everybody who runs for office on the Republican side talks about drag queens. That's why we're doing it. And because we don't want to talk about this other stuff because it's kind of hard to be heard.
Torts.
That's hard to follow, Joe.
Decades ago, the CIA would have been probably dealing with the problem with the Mexican government, but we don't do that as much these days. So, but military intervention, I think, is a non-starter, only because, for many reasons, but one being, we're we're trying to deal with an incursion of the Russians into Ukraine, and I think we kind of lose the moral high ground if we suddenly are going to start moving down to Mexico City ourselves.
Fair point.
We're trying to keep a group of countries together, allies together, to support the Ukrainians, and I don't see how we accomplish that if we're engaged in our own adventuresome military approaches to problems south of the border. So, yeah, the answer lies in securing the border and immigration policy, whether there's a will for our elected officials to deal with that issue seriously rather than pander and make it a political hot potato is another matter.
Back to you, Alonzo.
So, first of all, being, prior service myself, military action is that is not something that I take lightly. I usually don't support it. I'm usually in the camp of saying, I don't really care for war and try to be adventurous, I guess. Freddie put it in a really good way. But, I often hear a lot from my friends on the other side of the aisle, always about root causes. They always say, there's a root cause. And we can't really talk about, the issues with the border and why people are pouring way over here. We can't talk about why there's, HHS, the secretary, whistle blew and said that there was 80,000 migrant children that they no longer can locate. The opioid epidemic, we have fentanyl, flowing across the border. I mean, a lot of these issues are a violation of our territorial sovereignty, and so if we're going to actually, work with the Mexican government, then we need to make sure that they're not completely fused with the cartel. And I think that it's to a point now where the Mexican government cannot themselves do the operations necessary to pull themselves away. And so I think that's why I've listened to, it was Vivek Ramaswamy and Bill Barr, and they were having a conversation. And at first I was like you guys, I was like, man, they're crazy. What are they talking about? But then after listening to the conversation for a while and understanding the gravity, and if we really cared about fixing, some of these issues, maybe we would, possibly start to talk about, how can we do it in a non-intrusive way? How can we do it in an effective way, in a way that works? And I know it's a nation building effort and we're not really good at those, but I mean, with the right minds and the right plan, I think that we possibly could fix it and reverse the course of people wanting to come to America when we actually save their home, because it's in shambles right now.
We close with the anchor leg, issue number 5, Michael Carl.
Real quick, given the understandable skepticism about the accuracy of public polling, still, assuming that it's reasonably accurate, why is Jim Justice showing such high popularity numbers? What do you point to that's the situation?
Bill?
I think probably a couple of things. One, Jim Justice is well known. You might say Congressman Mooney is well known as well, but not to the same degree. Also, there's a lot of lip service given that Manchin would have a more difficult time running against Justice than what he would Mooney. There are a lot of Joe Manchin detractors, and they, I think, would see Justice as a better chance, better opportunity for defeating Joe Manchin than Mooney.
I assume these polls are just of Republican registered voters.
No. You and I have had this discussion many times. I think, and you keep going back to the 2016 poll, which I think you were exactly right. 2016 polls failed in a lot of degrees. Since then, there's been a lot of improvement on the polls. The 2022 were pretty accurate on all fronts. So I don't think you can right now dismiss the polls like you would have in 2016.
Joe Ferretti.
Well, I find it interesting that in the polling I've seen, the measuring stick was Joe Manchin in terms of this Senate seat. They had the poll was set up to see how Mooney would fare against Manchin versus how Justice would fare against Manchin. And Justice is clearly the stronger candidate right now by a wide margin. Now, that may speak to the work that Mooney has to do to try to, get more acquainted with the West Virginia voters across the state versus, what he now knows in his district. But Justice's popularity to me is kind of funny because, there's a lot of things, a lot of baggage he carries around that would, 10, 20 years ago had been disqualifying as a candidate for statewide office in West Virginia. Yet he seems to be able to overcome that rather easily and carries his dog around and appears at events all folksy and sometimes speaking off the cuff to his detriment. And West Virginia seemed to identify with that somehow. I mean, a billionaire of all people, can you imagine, in Appalachia? But he's got the magic, and it's hard to explain, but I think that he's going to be if his health holds out, he's going to be a very formidable candidate, and maybe the reason that Manchin decides not to run, because I find it interesting that characters like Larry Puccio, who, as a Manchin guy, was there standing up behind Justice at Justice's announcement for the Senate seat. So real interesting dynamics there. And I think that long term, if Justice can hold up in terms of his health and his well-being, I think he'll be our next senator.
30 seconds, Larry Schultz.
It's all the folksiness that Joe was talking about. That is, to me at least, the same thing as going to cultural issues instead of a platform for actual change. It's the same thing. People listen to Joe, to our governor, and they think, hey, he's just like me. Despite all the evidence to the contrary, because, me pays his taxes, for example.
Alonzo.
Yeah.
Close it out.
Alex Mooney just needs a commercial with the dog. Throw in a tennis ball, sunset in the background, white Rottweiler or a golden retriever. He goes out there, he pets it, he's like, you're a good boy. And then he just flips the baby dog, like sitting sad in the chair. That's how Alex Mooney wins this race.
The dog platform, I like it. Canines for Mooney is what you're saying there, right?